All right, welcome back. We've got that much of the book left. Got about 6 chapters left. We're cranking through this thing now. If you guys remember from the last time, Jack had just had a little chat with his dad. They stopped at an old car lot that his grandpa used to own, and Jack is learning quite a bit about his dad. So let's just continue on. We're looking at chapter 15. It's called Discoveries. As he hauled his gun busting equipment around the high school, it began to dawn on Jack just how huge the place really was. It was like 4 of his old elementary schools stacked up, one on top of the other. 4 times more floor space, 4 times as many classrooms and wastebaskets and pencil sharpeners, and 4 times as many lights and light switches and radiators, 4 times as many restrooms and sinks, not to mention the gyms, the locker rooms, the industrial art shops, and all the rest of it. And it all worked. It was more than 75 years old, and everything worked every single day. Jack tried to imagine what it would be like to be responsible for keeping the whole place going, and quickly gave up. It was almost too much to think about. It took Jack 2 or more scraping sessions to get the library free of gum. The last 4 tables were the worst, and by the time he was done with all the chairs, the 3-gallon bucket tucked behind the door in the supply closet was nearly full of gum. The loaded bucket weighed about 20 pounds, and it gave a sickening combination of odd gummy smells. Jack kept his gum bucket covered with a cloth to keep the odor from filling the supply closet. Looking at his pail of trophies, Jack thought, I wonder if I have invented a new category for the Guinness Book of World Records. The greatest quantity of gum ever removed from school property in 4 hours. Both Wednesday and Thursday, Jack had wanted to stay late like he had on Tuesday. He discovered he was actually looking forward to another ride home with his dad. It seemed like there was never enough time to talk to him at home. Dad was always tired or spending time with Mom, and then there was Lois, the world's biggest pest. Another ride home would be good. Jack thought a lot about what his dad told him on Tuesday, and now he wanted to ask him a million of questions, especially about the Vietnam War and being in the Army. Jack also wanted to know more about his grandfather, Honest Phil, and how Dad and Mom met and got married. Tons of questions like that. Jack had also wanted to stay so late that he used the time after gun patrol to search for that door that matched key number 73. He'd been on the lookout. He watched for doors in odd places, but Jack was pretty sure he would not find the steam tunnel door with the serious hunting expedition. Still, as much as he wanted to stay on Wednesday and Thursday, he went right home because he had too much of his own work to do. He had to do a big social studies project in about 13 original colonies, and he had to prepare for an oral report on the Indian in the cupboard. Again, check that book out, it's a good one. The project and the book report were both due on Monday. Another conspiracy hatched by evil teachers to overwork him. Jack sometimes wished that he could put things off till the last minute, but he just wasn't glued together. Not in that way, at least. He had to start an assignment the moment it was given and work steadily until it was out of the way. It was like he couldn't help it. He had to get things done on time and had to be places on time. So Jack had ridden the late bus home both Wednesday and Thursday right after gun patrol. Friday morning there was a light dusting of snow over Huntington. Jack listened to the morning newscast, and a woman reported that there had been a full 3 inches in Minneapolis overnight, and that it looked like it was going to be a snowy fall and winter, as if there was news from Minnesota. Jack loved the snow, and the more the better. But walking into the old high school, Jack noticed what the snow and the salt and the sand were doing to the floors. Instantly, Jack thought of his dad. He realized that his dad probably hated to see the first snow. The long, cold Minnesota winter must mean a lot of extra work for him. Mrs. Lambert wasn't in the room when the bell rang at the start of Friday's math class, and Jack wished she were. Kirk Dorfman had not taken any more cheap shots at him, but that was just because he hadn't had the opportunity. In the halls, Kirk and Luke laid off because they were afraid of what Pete might do. Math class was the only other time that Jack saw them, and Mrs. Lambert had kept a sharp lookout for trouble. Kirk had been moved 2 rows away from Jack, and the distance did help. The problem was that Luke Carnes sat between them. Making sure that Kirk was watching, Luke pulled a piece of pink gum out of his mouth and made a big show of sticking it right to the underside of his desk. Then he said, "Hey, Kirk, Do you think I could get old John to clean this off? Or should we ask Ackerby to have young Jackie do it? Jack ignored both of them. They were both idiots, completely clueless. They were pathetic. Jack found it remarkable, but he wasn't even tempted to trade words with them, much less trade punches. It was like he had moved into a whole different world, and they were still stuck somewhere else, trying to reach him. But Luke wasn't done. He felt like he needed to impress Kirk today, and he thought that Jack was ignoring him out of fear. Big mistake. Luke reached across the aisle and flicked Jack's ear. "What's the matter, Jackie? Didn't you hear me, or are you just acting stuck up?" Jack didn't lose his temper, but he did respond. Glancing quickly back toward the door to be sure Mrs. Lambert was still absent, he swung left to face Luke, his legs out in the aisle. Before Luke could even flinch, Jack stuck his right foot under Luke's long leg just behind the knee and lifted the leg straight up. No violence, just a muscle. Luke pulled his leg away, and Jack didn't even try to stop him. Jack had accomplished his mission. Because as Luke jerked his leg away, he banged it against the bottom of his desk and jammed it right into his own gob of fresh, sticky gum. As Jack swung around to face the front, again Mrs. Lambert walked into the classroom door. Striding to the front of the room, she said, "Quiet down, everyone. I know you'll hate to miss even one little bit of your precious math class, so please get your homework out." You guys have heard me say that before, haven't you? Then Mrs. Lambert noticed Luke trying to deal with the pink blob that was smeared onto the right leg of his new Abercrombie & Fitch corduroys. Turning around, she pulled the tissue from the box on her desk. "Here, Luke, just cover it up for now so it doesn't get stuck anywhere else. I've told you to never bring gum into my classroom, haven't I? That is one of the reasons why." With a perfectly straight face, Jack said, "Hey, Luke, there's the stuff that'll take that mess right out. Stop down to the janitor's sometime and I'll show you what to do." Mrs. Lambert smiled and said, "That's nice of you, Jack. Oh, and Jack." "Ah, it's nothing. All in today's work, Mrs. Lambert." Chapter 16. Behind the Curtain. After school, Jack was surprised to find Mr. Ackerby waiting for him in the workshop. His first thought was that Luke Carnes had ratted, and now he'd have a whole bunch of new trouble. Mr. Ackerby said, "Hello, Jack. I wanted you to know that I've been checking up on you. I got a good report from Mrs. Stokely. She says you're a hard worker, and I'm glad to hear that." Jack nodded and tried to look pleasant. Mr. Ackerby's compliment was sort of like having a jailer praise you for being a wonderful little prisoner. Mr. Ackerby went on, "I also came down here to find John. I feel pretty stupid not realizing right away that you were his son. I worked with him on all of our move all summer long last year, and we came up against a problem, and he'd figured out a way to solve it every single time. He certainly has this building in great shape. A big place this old doesn't keep working all by itself, that's for sure." Jack really didn't know what to say. He just sat there and nodded and said, "Yeah." "Stella, quit digging in that yard. Find you a new place to go stick your gummy nose." That's right. Mr. Ackerby was used to having kids feel uncomfortable when he talked to them. It was usually what he wanted. But he'd snooped around and he'd learned that Jack Rankin was a pretty good kid. Good student, honest, rarely in trouble. Every teacher Mr. Ackerby had approached seemed quite surprised about the incident in music class. So Mr. Ackerby was trying to get their relationship on a little friendlier tone. He asked, "So where are you going to be working today, Jack?" Jack said, "I've got to start in the auditorium," and to himself, Jack added, "Thanks to you and your slave layer program." Mr. Ackerby nodded. His eyebrows were lifting. "Another big job. Well, I won't keep you. I'm going to wait here for a few more minutes to see if I can catch your dad. And Jack, what with that 3-day weekend coming up and all, if you want to cut out at 3 today instead of 3:30, that'll be just fine." Yeah, thanks. Pretty chintzy gift, but it was better than nothing." Jack left the workshop with a new impression of Mr. Ackerby. The guy seemed almost human. Mr. Ackerby was the second person who had said that cleaning gum in the auditorium would be a big job. When Jack told Lou where he'd be working, Lou whistled and then said, "Well, nobody's got to accuse you or your daddy of giving you special treatment, that's for sure." So it'd be a big job. So what? The bigger the better. He was Jack, the fearless one, the climber of towers, the keeper of the keys. Ready to do battle, Jack pulled open the center of the door at the back of the auditorium. His heart sank. He stood there, one medium-sized boy armed with a red bucket and a putty knife. 875 folding seats stared at him with silent defiance. The place was vast. It means it was big. It's like a big auditorium, like walking into the Creative Performing Arts Center. Imagine having to scrape the gum off each and every single one of those chairs. That's what he was kind of walking into. The floor sloped sharply down toward the wide stage. The dusty gold curtain was 2/3 of the way open, and the area backstage was completely dark. The pale green walls needed fresh paint. High windows along the east wall let in the gloomy afternoon light. It looked to Jack like more snow was on the way. The theater style seats swung in a graceful arc, with an aisle on the east and the west, and one straight up the center. The backs of the seats' bottoms were covered with fake brown leather, fastened on by brass upholstery tacks. And the wooden underside of almost every seat was pockmarked with wads of gum. Yuck. With a deep sigh, Jack set down his bucket and began removing gum from the bottom of the seat number 1 in row W. The scraping and rubbing sounds that had seemed to be so loud in the library were lost in the huge room as if they floated off into outer space. Jack got into the rhythm of the work. Seat by seat, he moved across the wide back row, turned the corner, and headed right on back. He would work on a seat until it was done, straighten up, push the bucket forward with his foot, then bend down and start the next one. He scraped carefully, trying not to scratch the dark plywood, and he wasn't satisfied until his seat bottom was completely clean. By the time he had cleaned 2 rows, it was getting so dark that sometimes Jack couldn't tell if he'd gotten all the gum off by scraping, or if he should just use the offit to finish the job. He put his putty knife in the bucket, went to the center aisle, and walked downhill toward the stage. Time to turn on some lights, he was thinking. Vaulting easily up onto the front of the stage, Jack walked behind the curtain toward the right, his footsteps hollow on the wooden floor. He'd worked in the lighting crew for a play at his old school, so he knew what to look for. Somewhere there had to be a switch labeled House Lights. He headed for the right-hand wall. Backstage was a mess. Music stands and folding chairs were scattered about, and the dented kettle drums was half covered by large cardboard panels. They were pieces of scenery that had been painted to look like big blocks of stone along the top of the castle wall. A rack that had used to hold costumes was tipped over, and wire coat hangers lay in a tangled heap. Jack's eyes adjusted to the darkness of the stage, and he could see there was no light panel near the right-hand door. He did an about face, which means he turned around, and headed left, walking along the back of the wall of the stage area. Near the middle of the stage, Jack tripped on something, and he went sprawling on the floor, rubbing his elbow. He stood up, and he looked back to see what had caused the fall. It was a silver blade of a long sword, half hidden by a black curtain covering the rear of the wall stage. He bent over, pulled the whole thing out from behind the curtain, and straightened up to get a good look at it. It was only a stage prop made of wood, but it had been well made, carefully painted. It was a knight's broadsword, with a wide hilt, which is the handle, and a long handle, and made to swish and swing with both hands. It was almost 4 feet long, about the size of a baseball bat, but a little bit longer. Jack swung it and it made a pleasant whirring sound as it carved the air. It felt good in his hands. Holding it out in front of him at eye level, he lunged towards the curtain, pretending to jab at the evil knight. A clank came from behind the curtain. Maybe armor or something. There was a break in the curtain about 6 feet to his left. So Jack walked over, grabbed it, held on, and stepped out about 10 paces back toward the right. Just as Jack suspected, more stuff lay hidden behind the curtain. He saw a long jousting lance made from a bamboo pole, a shield that had been once a metal trash can lid. It had been spray painted white and decorated with a red lion wearing a gold crown. But that wasn't the best thing. The best thing had nothing to do with knights and armor and swordplay. The best thing was very simple. It was a door. On the door, there was just one word: access. Jack widened his eyes and put down his wooden sword and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a key, and the light was too dim to see the number, but he could feel there was only 2 numbers stamped on it. It had to be key number 73. He pushed the key into the jagged hold, held his breath, and turned. Bingo! The door hinged on the left, and Jack pulled it open wide. Peering into the shadows, he saw a short landing just inside the door, a set of metal stairs, 9 steps down, maybe more. It was pretty dark in there. There was a light switch on the wall to the right of the landing, but when Jack flipped it on, nothing happened. Suddenly aware of how his heart was pounding, Jack let himself off the hook. There was no hurry. Now that the door was found, he could take his time, gather some equipment, do a proper exploration. There's no need to go rushing, at least into that place. So he started to shut the door. And when he had the door almost all the way shut, Jack noticed something strange. When a door is almost shut, there's usually a flow of air either in or out. But the flow of air hitting Jack in the face was not coming out of the tunnel. Nothing strange about that. It wasn't the air itself that was odd. It was what the air was carrying. The air was carrying a smell. It was faint, so faint that Jack thought he must be imagining it, but it was a smell that Jack knew very well, a little too well. It was the smell of watermelon bubblegum. Huh. Chapter 17, The One-Way Ticket. Jack sniffed the air coming out of the steam tunnel again, carefully. There was nothing now. But there really had been the barest hint before, at least in that first rush of upward air. Watermelon bubblegum. Jack was absolutely sure. Well, at least he thought he was pretty sure about it. Gently, Jack closed the door. He pulled the black curtain to cover it again, tucking the wooden sword out of sight. Abandoning his search for the auditorium lights, he hurried across the stage, jumped down to the floor, and trotted up to where he'd left his bucket. Jack looked up at the clock and saw that it was already 3:45. He'd missed out on Mr. Ackerby's offer to quit early. Maybe the offer would carry over to Tuesday? He ran silently through the halls. When he reached the door at the top of the workshop stairs, Jack paused to listen. If possible, he wanted to get in, borrow a few important items, and then get right back to the auditorium without meeting anyone in the halls. He didn't hear anything, so he opened the doors, scooted down the stairs. He put his supplies away and then went over to his dad's desk. He was betting there would be a flashlight in there somewhere, and he was right. Top drawer, there was a small black mag light with the name of the plumbing supply company printed on its side in gold letters. Jack twisted the end of the light, and it came right on, bright and steady. It was perfect. He tucked the light into his back pocket and went over to the workbench, trying to imagine what else he might need. He couldn't really think of anything else, not for a quick first look. But when he saw a spool of nylon string, his mind flashed to the story of Huckleberry Finn. The part where Huck and Tom get lost in the caves. Jack grabbed the spool and stuffed it into the outer pocket of his backpack. Then he pulled out his old white Minnesota Vikings cap and put it on. The Vikings, whatever. He was all set to leave, was actually on the stairs, and then he stopped. He needed to leave a note for his dad. It was Friday, and Jack was sure that his dad wouldn't want to leave right at 5. Rushing back to the desk, he scribbled a note and a message and dashed back up to the landing where he almost collided with Lou. Lou flattened up against the wall, exaggerating his close call. "Whoa there, pal! Where you off to in such a big hurry? The late bus left already. You about ran me down." Jack said, "Sorry, Lou. I gotta go and study for a while. Maybe walk over to the library or something. Then I'm gonna ride home with my dad." I left him a note on his desk. Lou hurried down the stairs and grabbed the gray toolbox off the cluttered bench. "Your dad sent me to get the toolbox, and he said if you were still here, would you mind cleaning up the bench for him while you're waiting? We've got a busted door, and he wants to get it fixed before quitting time." Lou was already back at the landing. "So I'll just tell him that I gave you a message, okay? And if I don't see you again, have a good weekend, Jackie." Jack stood on the landing. Looking down, he could see that the workbench was a wreck after a busy week. He used to love putting it all back in order when he came to visit his dad at work. Yeah, Jack thought. Back when I was about 5 or 6, maybe. First, I've got to scrape the junk off about 10,000 seats, and then I have to clean up his messes too? Forget it. No way. Jack stomped back down the steps, crumpled up the first note he'd left, and tossed it in the trash. On a new piece of paper, he wrote, Dad, couldn't clean up the bench. I have some other stuff I've got to do. See you at 5. Jack. Jack made sure that no one saw him go back into the auditorium. Walking directly to the back of the stage, he left the wall curtain in place, no sense of advertising that somebody was already there. He took out the spool of string, set in his backpack on the floor beside the door, and turned on the flashlight. Pulling both keys from his pocket, he chose the right one and opened the door, just a crack. He wanted to check himself. He had just imagined what that water's smelling. Was he just imagining it? Nah, he couldn't have been. Nothing. At least, nothing that he could recognize. Mostly it smelled like his basement at home, but not as damp. Now stepping inside the doorway onto the meadow landing, Jack shone the light down the steps. 5 steps ran down to a short corridor, maybe 15 feet long and about 3 feet wide. The floor of the corridor was concrete, and the walls were terracotta building bricks, kind of the red color, the hollow kind. The ceiling was also concrete, a little less than 6 feet high. At the end of the corridor there was an opening, no door, just an opening, rectangular and dark. Jack wanted to leave the access door open, but it swung outward too far on its own. He tried putting his backpack against it, but then his backpack made a huge bulge in the velvet curtain that hid the door. Shining the flashlight around to see if there was something else to prop it with, he saw the wooden sword. He bent down and picked it up, smiling. He decided to take it with him. After all, most of the really great explorers had swords, didn't they? I don't know, it sounds good. The sword in hand, he stepped back inside to the landing, bravely pulling the door shut behind him. Instantly, he wished he hadn't. As he reached the knob inside the door, it wouldn't turn. Shining the light, Jack saw why. It was a double-keyed door, meaning it needed a key to open it from the inside, too. Reaching into his pocket, Jack froze. He only had one key. He didn't even bother getting it out to shine on the light on it. He knew it was the wrong one. It was the tower key. He needed the other key. It was close, only about 6 inches away, but Jack couldn't reach it. Key number 73 sticking from the lock on the outside of the door. So I think he's got himself a little predicament. He's on the inside, the key's on the outside, and we're going to stop right here because chapter 18 and the rest of the book will finish next time. So I'm curious to know what you guys think about so far. What is he going to find down there? Is he going to find anything? I don't know. Email me with what you think. I'm going to leave that right there for you. Yeah, it's a nice day outside. I got better things to do than this. So I'm going to find a hose and spray my dog. She was digging. I got to do something about that. Of course, it is that dumb mole that we have in our yard, so it kind of deserves it, I guess. See you next time.